Welcome, everyone. My name is John Sears. I'm the Lean Coordinator at DEC. Today is the first in the core content of the Lean Leadership Training. It's part of a 7-level course that I'm going to be talking about over the next several weeks, or every 2 weeks for almost 3 months. Today, we're going to be talking about data collection, and data collection is something that's near and dear to my heart as a data analyst by nature and as someone that values data. So all of these talks are going to be conversation-based and introductions to topics, right? We've only got a half an hour to get through each one of these. They're designed to be introductions to a lot of ideas and principles that altogether hang into a lean management system that can be of great value to you and your group that you manage. So my hope is that even if you attend some or all of these, they do hang together all as one, but they do have value individually too. And I can see that I've already got a question from Helen. Go ahead.
Sorry, that was an accidental hand raise.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so I asked folks, did you do data collection as part of your last change management effort? So we've got 5, 6, 7 participants who voted, and 71% of you said yes, 14% of you said no, and one person said, I don't know. So somebody that said yes, would you mind volunteering and telling us what kind of data you collected as part of your change management effort? So Kayla, Helen, David.
How long it takes to complete a task?
Great. How long it takes to complete a task is definitely something that has a lot of impact on any change management effort, especially continuous improvement. Anyone else want to volunteer?
Whether they were inputting in data correctly to begin with.
Great. Yep. So did you survey them, or was that, how did you collect that data?
SQL pull.
Yeah. So a lot of the data analysis that we do tends to come from data we already have available, right? Information that comes from the database, and how we handle that is something that we're going to talk about here, but also how we can go and get data, because oftentimes the data that would best inform the decisions we make and the choices that we invoke rely on data that we don't have readily available in our database. So we collect data for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, in my mind, is building baselines, setting realistic targets, and choosing areas to focus on. So we're going to talk about 3 different areas of data collection. We're going to talk about counting, we're going to talk about the process, and we're going to talk about workload and effort that it takes. So I've put in parentheses a lot of terms that I don't expect you to memorize, but may show up if you decide to Google these things later. When we're talking about counting, we're going to be talking about Pareto analysis. So the focus of that effort is to determine the problem and target a solution. So for big, complicated things that have a lot of aspects, how can we focus in on the areas that need the most attention? When we talk about witnessing the process, we're talking about a Gimbal Walk. So the Gimbal Walk is about showing respect, and it's about listening and learning and participating and really growing from our experiences with people doing the work. And when we talk about workload balancing and workflow, that's commonly referred to as Yamazumi, and it's about focusing on process efficiency and managing staff workload. So as a manager, I expect that you've dealt in all of these issues before. And when we talk about these topics, it's to grow your toolkit, to give you something to Google, to send me a message on Teams and say, John, I want to do this thing. Tell me more. Because we're not going to be able to go deep in depth on any one of these topics specifically, although we're going to be spending a little bit of time on Pareto. So my hope is to provide you an introduction and to sort of broaden the toolkit that you have to access the challenges that you face as managers. So first thing that we're going to talk about is Pareto. Can folks see I got a message about data quality? Can everyone still see and hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So what you can see here is an example of a Pareto diagram. And the idea being that problems are really big and complicated, but as much as 80% of the problems can be experienced through 20% of the actual errors that we face. So here's an example of website issues. So we want to be able to distinguish a vital few from a trivial many. So what you can see here is a count. And where Pareto gets interesting is what's called this cumulative percentage. So it basically says, okay, we've got almost 500 here. That represents about 50% of the data. Here's another 200 here. If we add that 50% to the 20%, you gradually build up to 100%, and eventually you account for all of the conditions that people are experiencing. But you see, just 3 different error types can account for over 80% of the errors people are experiencing. So what it allows us to do is to get away from a mindset of experiential challenges that we face and focus it more on where is the actual work, because something like a security warning or browser compatibility issues may be challenging or complex or really be frustrating for the person doing the work. But the bulk of the things that our customers are experiencing, that people we're working with are experiencing, are broken links, spelling errors, missing title tags. So if we focus on those efforts, just 3 of them, we can deal with over 80% of the issues people are experiencing. Now, that is a out of nowhere example. So let's talk a little bit about how we build Pareto and how we can use real data. All right, so the data gathering process is really important. So first, we have to group or categorize areas to do a Pareto analysis. So in that, you saw a number of bins like broken links or spelling errors. You have to be able to bin them into a certain type of error or a certain type of situation that occurs, and then measure their frequency. So how often do these things happen? So you can do this over a period of time. The period of time you wish to cover depends a lot on the type of process that you're working with. If you have a permit, for example, that takes 6 months to complete, and you've got 10 to 20 permits coming through a year, you might need to take 6 months of data collection in order to really understand what are the types of errors that are coming in, what are the challenges people are experiencing. And then you have to collect that data. So let's say you are working in a program and you get a lot of phone calls. It might mean that every time you get a phone call, you're using a call log to document what did they call about and putting it into one of the pre-established bins. And even if you have multiple people fielding these phone calls, they're all using the same bins. They're all collecting the same data. They're all gathering up this database of what are people calling about and why are they calling about it. Calls in particular are really great for Pareto because they can be such a disruption to our workflow, and they represent the errors that are popping up over and over again that really sap staff time. So if you're collecting data through phone calls or database tools, there are a lot of different ways you can collect this information, but a lot of times it requires human involvement because binning those things doesn't happen automatically. So once you've collected the data, recording the category each time, then you can subtotal them for each category. So here's an example. So I've been working with Shay Miller in Watershed. This is an example of the Watershed admin incomplete data. So every time they get an admin incomplete status, they assign a category to that incomplete. And I've sorted them by volume. So the most common type of admin incomplete error they get is a missing annual inspection report. The next most common is a missing fee, followed by missing the restatement of compliance, and so on, working down the line. So some of these might be relatively simple, but fixing them doesn't really deal with a high volume problem. If you want to get admin complete applications, focusing on where the highest instances of error occur is the biggest place to work. So we're going to do a very quick exercise in which we're going to see this in action. So in order to construct the Pareto analysis, we would have to create a vertical bar chart, arrange the bar chart in descending order of cause, so highest counts first, calculate the cumulative count for each one, calculate the cumulative count percentage for each in descending order in order to construct that Pareto chart, plot the cumulative count percentage, and then draw an 80% line. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you all what a Pareto chart can look like with a very simple data analysis tool. So this is a Pareto template. It very easily allows you to populate your defects, indicate the number of counts, and it'll automatically calculate the cumulative percentages. So I'm going to go ahead and break that out. And I'm going to go ahead and provide a link to this in the chat. I think you should all be able to access this. If I can click the right thing. So if we take some fictional data, so a data gathering scenario, we imagine a permitting program. They receive calls which disrupt workflow and distract from work. So 3 staff receiving over 100 calls over the course of 1 week and record their reasons for their call. So we can skip a couple of steps because we have 100 calls, so it's very easy to get the percentages. But over that time, we've got 43 calls asking for a link to the application, 39 calls asking for a check to the status of the application, 12 calls asking if a permit is needed, 3 asking to get walked through the application, 2 looking for help compiling resources, and 1 call just to talk. We've all had those people that just want someone to talk to at a given time, and sometimes we oblige them if we can, and other times we can as part of our customer service. But you can see we're getting a lot of phone calls. So based on this data here, we would order this in order using the tool that I provided. Unfortunately, we don't really have time to go through actually filling out that data. But does anyone know of the issues listed here, which ones we might want to focus on? Feel free to raise your hand or just speak up.
Well, the status should be on the e-notice board, so it should be easy to look up.
Yeah, so we're not necessarily looking for solutions to these problems, but which problems of all of the ones listed here do we want to focus on? The solutions could be widely varied, but which problems do we want to focus on?
Link to the application and status.
Yeah. So when I was working in drinking water, we got a lot of phone calls for people asking 2 primary questions, and it was, what is my status as a drinking water system operator? And what is my sampling data? Can you send it to me? And we gathered that data over a long period of time, and it was very easy to then build a very straightforward website that allowed people to check those 2 things. And call volume dropped off dramatically following implementing that effort. And it's things like that, through collecting this data through Pareto, that we're able to focus on 39% and 43%. Those 2 categories alone account for over 80% of the data. Now, it's not always that clean where, all we have to do is do 2 things and we can account for 80% of our phone calls. As you can see in our example of the watershed, it can be a lot more complicated than that. And if you wanted to deal with 80%, you'd actually have to come all the way down to compliance and transfer issues. It highlights another one of the challenges with Pareto is this category of other. So other being a category can seem really great when you're working really fast and trying to categorize this work, but it actually doesn't allow you to do anything with it. So having that category of other, what do you do with that? How do you address that challenge? How can you focus that challenge? So try and come up with a set of criteria that are broad enough to capture everything, but also specific enough to allow you to take action in that category. That's always the challenge with Pareto. So before we move on, any questions about Pareto? Because we've got 2 more data gathering techniques that I want to talk about today. And the link to the Excel is in the chat for the folks on this call, and I'll be making it available via a link to all the folks that are watching afterwards on Microsoft Stream or YouTube. Yeah, Caitlin has a comment. Pareto seems to relate well to impact effort matrices. It absolutely does, because you are pre-cataloging impact, right? You want to deliver the biggest impact you can. It's only through counting that we can identify that. And that's most often not data that we actively have, unless you're proactive like the watershed folks are in having categories to assign their admin and complete. And a lot of the Pareto types of issues tend to work really well with admin type tasks because they are often broad, they often have to be categorized, and they often have easier to implement or more straightforward solutions to tackle those challenges because they tend to be lower complexity. Okay, so that's it for Pareto. Now I want to talk about experiencing the process or Gimbal walks. So what is a Gimbal walk? What is experiencing the process? So in a remote environment, it could be as simple as allowing someone to share their screen and walk them through a process. What Gimbal Walk means in a production environment is walking the line, seeing the experiences and seeing what happens. And there are a couple of core principles that we like to follow when doing this. And it's observe, don't correct. It's not about fixing things then and there. It's about seeing what happens, about respectfully experiencing things, and just taking it all in and seeing how the work is done. Because as a manager, we're tasked with overseeing the tasks, and we may not have the nitty gritty of first you do this, then this, then this, then this. And even if you have a great understanding of the process, understanding how you complete each step of that process can be really valuable. So we want to take a look at what are the value add activities that are being completed. So what's working and also what's not working, but also seek to understand. I notice you're doing it this way. Is there a particular reason why you're doing it that way? Not come at it from a perspective of that's silly, don't do that, but that process step, that way of doing business came about through a mechanism, and understanding what that mechanism is can help you understand the overall process. Where are you losing value in the process and why? Are things waiting? A lot of times in state government, we have things sitting on people's desks. That's a huge source of waste and something that we can really work on improving. And you can also watch for ideas. So innovate, improve conditions, tools, and procedures. You want to work with people ultimately to remove the elements that are detrimental to production. And that starts with understanding what the process is and how people are going about it. Now, the way I've seen this work a lot in state government is watching someone use a tool, seeing how many clicks are they doing? What are the number of applications they need to open? How many steps are they going through to do something? Something that you think might be simple and straightforward might actually involve several steps. And like a simple fix either to the database or to the tool can really make a world of difference for people that are doing the same thing over and over and over again. This is where we can really focus on waste. So there are 8 wastes in Lean. I want to bring your attention to 7 of them that are the most relevant to state work. So these are things. Waste is defined by our end users' experiences. So their delay, waiting, or time spent in a queue. We all have stacks of paper on our desk. The lower those stacks are, the faster these things move through the process. producing more than's needed, so overproduction, doing work that's not adding value. Transportation, so we have a lot of transactions, so this has to go to a manager for signature, so it can go to another manager for a signature, and so on. These constant exchanges really can slow a process down. Unnecessary movement or motion, inventory, and production of defects, so errors, things like that. These are things to look out for when you're in these types of experiences. The final one that I want to talk about is workload balancing, or Yamazumi. So there are 3 time metrics that we can consider when we're talking about any given process. And those are cycle time, which is time spent working on a process, lead time, which is how much the time between the start of a process and the end of a process for a single thing moving through that process. So for example, a permit might be 3 to 6 months. Cycle time might only be 2 weeks, right? It's the amount of time you actually spend working on a process. And takt time is the target time to produce an item to meet demand. So if we got 6 permits in a year, we would need to produce permits at a rate of 2 a month in order to keep up. So what is the pace that we need to maintain in order to keep up with our workload? So we can measure how long things take, how long we spend on processes. So if you've ever sat down over a week, a month, or a year and said, I spend 20 minutes on this a week, and the overall process piece for me takes 6 months because I'm only working on it a bit at a time. And you can stack up these individual processes and the activities that go into contributing them and say, okay, well, we need to do this at a certain pace in order to get these things moving. And you can very visually see we are taking too long on this step. So if you could take this activity and move it to a different phase of the process, or do some sort of pre-work, or reallocate resources to a different piece of the process. Ultimately, we were talking about breaking down processes by staff or process to identify what is our optimal workflow? How can we get things moving through faster? And it takes a willingness to approach it as we are a team, we work together, and it is in all of our best interests to produce these better, faster, more efficiently. And sometimes that involves things like shifting work duties, making adjustments to process. This really opens us up to continuous improvement. For example, in this example, there are a lot of wasted or unnecessary steps. Can we eliminate those? How much of them can we eliminate? Because if we can eliminate activity 4 here and activity 3 here, we can be pumping these out a lot faster because we only move as fast as the slowest stage of a process. So if a permit is sitting on a desk for 2 months, it almost doesn't matter how quickly we get through the other stages because it's still going to be 2 months until they get to look at it. That's particularly true of things that have to be approved on a quarterly basis by some sort of board or something like that, where there are these gates that have to be reached. And sometimes we can make processes parallel, or there are a lot of approaches that we can take, but it's only once we understand how that workload is distributed, both among staff and in terms of process, that we can make the moves to improve that process. So that's all we had today. Half an hour flies by really fast, and I know I throw a lot of stuff at you. So I wanted to give you the terms and terminology to cover as much of it as I could to allow you to Google or reach out to me or Justin Kenny. Speaking of Justin, I want to pause here for questions, but there is a statewide Orange Belt course that goes more in depth on all of these topics that Justin provides. It's a full day in-depth analysis of a lot of continuous improvement methodology and lean leadership. I want to put a plug in for that and then stop for any questions. And I promise to make that Pareto template more available. It's in chat right now. If you can access it, great. If not, I will be providing links to those templates. All right. All right, I see some folks typing. You can raise your hand if you got any questions or just speak up. more about Yamazumi. Yeah, so there are additional templates for Yamazumi. They can be intimidating right off the bat, but they are focused around breaking down workload and collecting that information, because it really does take someone to sit down and say, I work on this 40% of my time, and really understanding that, because until you do that, you really don't know what you have to work with in terms of flexibility or in terms of how much time gets spent on things. So there's still a lot more room to explore with Yamazumi and all of these tools. So I encourage you to reach out to me, john.sears@vermont.gov. Let me hear it, and I'm happy to talk more about this. So thank you so much for your time today. We're at time. So thank you for attending today. Check out training in 2 weeks. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.